The format is a video that was made using Microsoft PowerPoint. The POV of the man sitting and watching TV was used to give a more realistic experience of the debate, as if you actually viewed it live. Shrek and Farquaad were used in order to engage the audience and add creativity. This debate is on the topic of the Canadian Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion. Shrek, voiced by Malik Naim, an environmental activist, played the part of the opposition, and Farquaad, voiced by Cameron Collins, CEO of Suncor Energy Incorporated, played the part of the proposition.
Learn geography, I must. Learn geography.
Mummy! Mummy! Mama! Mama! Mama!
What?
Hi.
The last 4 road teams have won in the series. Lowry lighting it up here in the first 2+ minutes.
Hello there, my name is Shrek, and as an environmentalist and spokesperson for Canadian swamps, I'll be arguing against the expansion of the Canadian Trans Mountain Pipeline.
Good evening. I am Lord Farquaad, CEO of Suncor Energy Incorporated. I will be demonstrating why the expansion of the pipeline simply must proceed. Since I am of higher authority, I shall begin. Canada has already been struggling to export its natural resources on the global market, thus this initiative will worsen Canada's overall trade deficit. Therefore, by not building this pipeline, there can be several negative implications in both the short and long term. In the short term, the inability for Canada to develop its own resources will scare off potential investors, thus leading to a severe blow on the Canadian economy. In the long term, this will cause the price of oil to remain below global market value, thus leading to a drastic decrease in revenues, tax receipts, investment, and production and employment in the natural resource sector.
Alrighty Farquaad, while you have a point there about the financial reasons, there would be negative long-term consequences as well, lad. Canada would mightily struggle to meet its 2030 Paris Agreement commitments by adding more infrastructure to this already high-emitting industry. Now, probably the biggest problem with this expansion is its effects on the local ecosystems. Habitats will be destroyed, and sensitive species could suffer drastically. British Columbia's southern resident orca population is already on the brink of extinction, which would be exacerbated due to the increase in oil tanker traffic inevitable after pipeline expansion.
Although the implementation of the pipeline may have a slight impact on the various ecosystems, there are much greater concerns out there that should be addressed first. For instance, overfishing and stream pollution have much more detrimental impacts on Ontario, Canada's ecosystems. In fact, both overfishing and water pollution in Canada's Pacific Northwest have led to a drastic decrease in many aquatic species, including the king salmon, which is the orca's main food source. Therefore, these issues are of much greater concern to the overall livelihood of the orca's survival, and thus should be fixed first. Although slightly decreasing salmon fishing will decrease Canada's economic output, it will be nothing in comparison to not implementing the pipeline project. In addition, it will allow the salmon population to recover, thus positively impacting orcas and Canada's marine ecosystem as a whole. This brings me to my next point, you smelly ogre. The majority of oil spills are reported in other countries where environmental standards are much lower. For instance, strict guidelines for tankers on the coastlines have vastly reduced the likelihood of oil spillage occurring, whilst producing less emissions. With the advancements of technology and monitoring, spillages that happen to occur are often mitigated in a short period of time, leading to less overall damage.
Fair enough, Farquaad. But even if these companies reduce the chances of spills, it still remains a risk. You cannot look me straight in the eye and tell me this pipeline expansion project will result in zero spills. Let me elaborate on oil spills then now, Farquad. As many other environmentalists say, it is not a matter of if, but when. Spills happen every year in the existing pipeline locations and severely threaten local inhabitants of my swamps, both animals and fellow ogres. Expansion of the pipeline will lead to more oil tankers as well, lad. Around 5,000 liters of oil was spilled along the existing Trans Mountain pipeline in 2018, and the repercussions of the 100,000 liter fuel spill in the BC Central Coast are still being felt today. Around 150 spills were reported between 2016 and 2018 alone. It's simply ridiculous.
Shrek, it is evident that you only focus on worst-case scenarios and lose sight of the overall picture. According to my chums at the Transportation Safety Board, from 2009 to 2013, 654 of the 770 pipeline accidents in Canada resulted in the release of oil product. Of that number, only 5 of these instances led to environmental damage, suggesting that 0.65% of all accidents due to pipeline spillage are dangerous. Rational people do not live their lives by worst-case scenarios, or else they would never ride a bike or take a shower. Although by the pungent smell of rancid onions entering my nostrils, I can imagine you aren't very familiar with the concept of showers. Evidently, pipelines are the safest and best available way to transport oil. As you are a so-called environmentalist, surely you must have noticed how pipelines are also quite efficient with emissions. Pipeline transport along with a carbon tax is always going to be less expensive and use less emissions than traditional vehicular transport. By not implementing pipeline transport, the cost associated with oil and gas production, and current transportation methods, could easily exceed $1,500 per ton. Since the majority of the oil comes from Alberta, a landlocked province, it is a choice between either pipelines or the current emission-heavy transportation methods.
Listen here, you overgrown toddler. I'll have you know we only bathe in the finest of onions across the swamps. Sure, pipelines are more emission efficient than current vehicular methods, but has the thought of electric vehicles ever crossed your mind? Rather than investing in a program that will harm my swamps, why not inject this money into a future-proof but environmentally friendly program, such as electric vehicles? Moving on then, we still haven't talked about the Indigenous perspective. Indigenous concerns are mainly about protection of cultural sites and preservation of wildlife habitat, which some communities rely on for activities such as fishing. Many Indigenous leaders complain about a lack of consultation, as their voices are largely ignored. While they have the ability to assert their opposition to the expansion, they don't really have any final say on the matter, and will most likely have their rights ignored. After years of mistreatment, the least Canada can do is give Indigenous leaders an authoritative voice in matters that directly affect them.
Well, actually, there has been talk of First Nations purchasing a majority stake in the pipeline project. Isn't this interesting, Mr. Shrek? In fact, there is a large number of Indigenous people who actually support the pipeline project due to the possible financial gains. The pipeline will create jobs along with various investment opportunities to help their communities prosper. This leads to my final point. By not developing resources, income inequality in Canada will rise to new heights. Through the implementation of resource development projects, like the Trans Mountain Pipeline, not only will the local workers benefit, but the economy will also experience large wage spillovers to workers in many other industries. For example, construction, transportation, and service industries will all reap the benefits as well. This will increase the tax revenue generated by the government, thus leading to better social programs and a more prosperous middle class.
At the end of the day, Farquad, If changes are not made, we are all bound to suffer the consequences of global warming due to the collection, transportation, and burning of fossil fuels. If you want to focus on financial gain at the expense of our future, by all means be my guest. To all the listeners of today's debate, you are the future generations who will be impacted by Lord Farquhar's ignorance on the topic. I hope that you can all see the direness of our current situation and think twice before building that big ol' pipe. Alright, that'll do, donkey. I believe we have reached the end of our discussion here, lad. Keep your bloody pipes away from me, Swamp, and we won't have any problems.
Pipelines are simply essential for the future of our economy, and it will not be rejected at the expense of your shallow intelligence. I beg you consider showering after this segment, you big smelly oaf. Your pipes will be arriving soon. See you then.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for next week's episode where LeBron James argues over another call with the referee.
Points on Sunday, 0 in transition. Harris! James goes down, Harris goes down, and no whistle. I'll make a bid.
He's fine.
Overall, the debate was very successful. Shrek agreed with Farquaad's point regarding the effectiveness of implementing the pipeline as a way to bolster the Canadian economy. However, Shrek and Farquaad had different economic views on the effects of pipeline expansion in the long run. While Farquaad agreed that pipelines can negatively affect Canadian ecosystems, he believed that there were bigger dangers to ecosystems that need to be addressed first, such as overfishing and stream pollution. Shrek thought oil spills were a major consequence of pipeline transport, whereas Farquaad completely disagreed, mentioning the exaggeration of oil spill occurrences. They also completely disagreed on pipelines and their effects on emissions, the role of Indigenous people, and social factors. It was not very difficult to stay on either side, as we embraced our characters despite the high-quality points raised by both parties. This was accomplished through additional research allowing rebuttals to effectively counter each major assertion. Overall, the ultimate goal should be to come to an outcome that encompasses both parties so that middle ground can be attained, since Canada's economy and environment are equally important. I would recommend officials to carefully consider all sides of the debate, as both parties present plausible arguments. Perhaps it may be more beneficial to favor the long term over the immediate benefits or consequences, as our nation should always focus on building for the future.